Okay. So now I want to go to the other side of this whole matter of spiritual life in the world, contemplative, being a contemplative in the world as we all are. And that's going from that wonderful awareness of the divine presence and all the peace and grace that comes from it and the love that wells up within us, which is the John of the Cross calls the living flame of love, the divine energy itself, as that goes into action, goes into our day-to-day kind of interactions with people, the awareness that we have of others, and our capacity to respond from a depth of kindness and compassion and love. I want to talk about that. This whole matter, this whole matter of the relationship of contemplation and action is really a question of balance and a question of a kind of organic tension between the two. And I think the deeper you develop this capacity of the contemplative experience, when it becomes when that shift comes between your own effort and God's grace, it becomes passive contemplation or infused wisdom, you find that the wall between action and contemplation breaks down. It's an artificial distinction. It's all the same flow. It's basically, it's integrating in yourself quite naturally, spontaneously, two levels of awareness, the vertical and the horizontal. To put it another way, it's balancing two loves, love of God and love of one another. And the action part takes us into the sphere of being present each moment to the demands of love, demands of charity, of mercy, of kindness, of compassion in each moment. In our society, it's very, very interesting that we are taught from very young to follow a schedule, which is okay. But that business of being bound to a schedule has emphasized the value of convenience. Convenience. And that value of convenience can become a real obstacle to the demands of love because it can cause people, I've seen it in my life, it can cause you to not respond or not even see what is right before you. What I've learned from many years of trying imperfectly to live the spiritual life, the fuller human reality, is that the gospel just is simply not about what we want. It's never about what we want. And it's never convenient. That's what I have found. Love is not convenient. Charity is not convenient. It goes against the grain. But we're going uphill here because it's a struggle upstream, because our society is about our convenience, our comfort, taking care of our needs. And I had this lesson driven home to me through a homeless man in Chicago some years ago. His name is Jerome. Jerome comes to see me late at night sometimes. And he lives on a Metra train station on the stairs. The police let him stay there. And that's how I met him, like 9 years ago, almost 10 years ago. And I've gotten to know him very, very well, and I know his heart. But I always tend to, on the street, I'll meet him when I'm in a mad rush. I'm in a mad rush to get to school on time. You know, it's been almost impossible for me to be on time. It's like metaphysically impossible. I'm getting better. I'm getting better at it. But you know, I got a cell phone a year and a half ago for one reason, to let people know when I'm going to be late. Really, I mean it. But I'm getting better and better at it. But one of the reasons is because I get caught by people, and I need, you know, and I try to be present. Well, one day, this is how this lesson came home to me. Several years ago, I was trying to go from Hyde Park in the South Chicago to the Loop to a class. And I was running behind schedule. And I'm getting up the avenue where I have to turn right to get the bus. And there's Jerome standing there. And I just know, oh God, this is going to be a half hour. My students will go home. I mean, they'll leave class. They're not going to wait for me. So I thought, well, I'll see him later. And so I went the other way, and I walked all the way around, and Jerome is standing the other place. And I thought, how did he do that? So then I tried one more time, and I went around again, all the way around, and Jerome was there too. And so I said, okay, I get the message. It's not about our convenience. That contemplation is a refinement by the divine grace, the very being of God, God's tender love for us. It's a refinement in the divine presence that develops all of our capacities, particularly our capacities for receptivity, sensitivity to the divine presence. There are many capacities to receive the divine presence and to awaken our spontaneous ability to respond to others, other persons, other sentient beings. You know, even a worm that's like crawling on the sidewalk after a storm, that is not a small thing to God. It's a very big thing to God. It engages our compassion. It engages us to respond. It's funny that the Dalai Lama, there were 3 cases where the Dalai Lama that I know of responded to other sentient beings. One was a cat, another was a deer, and a third was a parrot. That this deer and this parrot and this wild parrot, there are a lot of wild parrots in India, and this cat at different times wandered onto the compound. And it came within His Holiness's eyesight, and he adopted them. He took care of the cat. He just made the cat a member of his household. And the deer, for years that he would feed the deer and he'd interact with the deer. Deer are very much associated with Buddhist temples because of the Buddha's first sermon in the deer park. And that deer lived for several years on the compound, but then it fell over an embankment and broke its leg and it died. But the parrot flew into the compound and its wing was broken. So His Holiness took it in, and that night he'd put it in a cage, and the wing got better, and the bird could fly again. So he let the bird go. And the bird would just fly up into the tree during the day and around, and it would come back at night to the cage. And it had a good thing going. It wasn't going to leave it on a bodhisattva. But my point is his capacity to respond to these other sentient beings, or to any being, that his sensitivity, to his compassion to be able to respond. Another time, I remember this, he was at Harvard. And it was a very important conference. And it was before a huge body of people. And he was interacting with 3 or 4 professors. And each professor was to have 10 or 15 minutes or 20 minutes, say. And this is being televised and recorded for later promotion or broadcast. And the first professor went over his allotted time, and he kept talking. And as he got to 19 minutes, the anxiety in the other professors began to get noticeably, the tension was rising. And when he went over 25 minutes, they were getting resentful. When he got to 28 minutes, they were angry. And at 30, they were ready to rip him off the stage. And His Holiness remained completely at peace during the whole thing and was listening with very, very deep, devout attention. And maybe that was the lesson of the whole thing. They had completely lost their peace, their perspective, and they were enraged. And, they were very, very angry. But His Holiness, in his sensitivity, he saw that this person had a need to communicate something and that His Holiness discerned that this was going to really help him to do that. But it was, at the same time, it would teach a lesson to the other professors and to the audience watching. That is an incredible, bless you, that's an incredible incident of sensitivity. And it's not something that is valued in our culture because we don't have that kind of awareness. Well, contemplation gives you that kind of awareness. It develops those kinds of levels of attention. It's about attention. And it's about sensitivity. And sensitivity, to me, that kind of sensitivity is really the highest form of intelligence. Because it's possible to develop the intellect to a very high degree and have no sensitivity at all. Our universities are filled with people like that. Really, seriously. My uncle John, who was a professor, he said, our universities are filled with dopes. That they have very brilliant minds and very stupid hearts. Their hearts, most are very highly developed. But some just develop their intellectual capacities and they never kind of develop their emotional kind of intelligence and other levels of sensitivity. And contemplation doesn't let you get away with that. See what I'm saying? That it's a holistic kind of transformation, and it also affects very, very, very deeply our relationships with other beings, with other sentient beings, with nature, with the whole ball of wax. Everything is important. Now the action part, taking our contemplative experience or the fruit of that awareness into the realm of our interactions, our associations, and our attempts at making a contribution to transform society, that should flow out of contemplation quite naturally. The struggle for social change, the struggle of social justice, and the work to develop ecological awareness and sensitivity, it really has to be done with awareness. And contemplation gives us that awareness. There are so many people who become activists who lack a rootedness in contemplative awareness. And they do great things, but there's often a tremendous anger there and a bitterness and a kind of a hatred for the establishment. And I'm amazed, for instance, at how much hatred is directed towards George Bush. And have you noticed that? I mean, he has been, it's true, he's a failure as a president. But I don't think it helps to direct such anger at him. We should be praying for him, mostly praying for his retirement. And I found it really ironic, in the peace movement, this tremendous outpouring of outrage at Bush, and yet it's a peace movement, you know? That outer peace has to come from inner peace, you know, and that if we do the work on ourselves through a contemplative kind of process, then we're really making peace with everyone and everything. About peacemaking for contemplatives, contemplation itself is peacemaking. Centering prayer is a process of making peace and of enlarging our ability to respond in creative ways, in ways that have real wisdom and insight, to know, to be able to discriminate what is necessary, discern what is necessary in promoting peace, ecological awareness, closing the gap between the haves and the have-nots, criticism of corporate abuses, criticism of the pharmaceuticals. And I bet we have a long list of grievances for the pharmaceuticals. Or unjust practices in taxation, where one segment of society is carrying the burden and others are getting off, and those that should be paying their taxes are not. So groundedness in that inner process prepares us to be peacemakers, social justice activists, apostles for ecological responsibility and sustainability, and advocates for the homeless, or for to bring down the level of violence in our society. This is a very important topic. You know, the UN had a study commissioned from utilizing an international group of social scientists and biologists. And the fundamental question was, is violence innate to the human species? And this was done under UNESCO, and mostly in Europe and the United States. And this group of scientists studied it for a number of years, and they came to a number of conclusions. And the most important conclusion is violence is not innate to our species, it's a learned behavior. Other than self-defense, it's a learned behavior. We have learned to be warlike. We are not warlike by nature. And this is immensely good news, because we can outgrow violence, and we can outgrow this dependence on war that we've had. But we've got a long way to go. So to work to bring the level of violence down would be a great step forward. John Paul II, and throughout his whole pontificate, and Paul VI have spoken of again and again a civilization of love, building a civilization of love, which harkens back to Augustine's City of God. And this civilization of love, I think, is kind of the ultimate goal of history, which is really, civilization of love is really, in a sense, the vision of the gospel. Trying to make the world Christian as trying to humanize the world in basic decency, you know, in basic gentleness. One thing about Christianity that's most extraordinary, and Judaism and Buddhism and Hinduism, is they're very humanizing. I mean, over a period of time, they have gained more and more insight. And, you know, the church went from burning women at the stake, you know, from the 8th to the 14th centuries. Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of women lost their life during that time. And then, of course, the trials for heresy, the Inquisition, and all sorts of ecclesial abuses went from that kind of activity to embrace nonviolence. As we've seen in John Paul's pontificate, has been an eloquent commitment to nonviolence. He was against the Gulf War. He was eloquently against the recent Iraq War. That there is, that Christianity has evolved, and I think that the fundamental insight of Christianity is basically caritas, is love in action, is selfless love. I don't mean the hierarchy, you know. I mean, what is it that has produced so many millions of saints? You know, there are many saints in this room. You know, for everyone that's canonized, there are a couple 100 million that aren't. But what has produced that? It's the inspiration of the gospel, which is really the kingdom of earth. And contemplation awakens us to that kingdom of God on earth, which Jesus tells us is right here now. It's within us. It's the indwelling of the Spirit within us. But it's also in the demands of love right here and now. And to be able to see it is the kingdom of heaven, is the kingdom of God on earth. So the civilization of love is predicated on caritas. I don't like the word charity because it's too weak a translation of this incredibly profound Latin insight. Caritas is the order operative on a universal scale. Augustine called it the tranquility of order. But it's the order of heaven. It's the order of peace between that functions in relationships between God and between and among us in the world. That is the kingdom of heaven. And that order of peace, of tranquility, is love itself, divine love, agape, selfless love, the kind of love you see operative in the lives of saints. To me, that is the real kingdom of heaven on earth, and not the hierarchy or the external structures. I mean, they're part of it, but they can also get in the way, as we have seen, right? Isn't it? Contemplation generates to recognize this existential reality of the kingdom here within our being, in our awareness, in our interrelationships with everyone and everything. And contemplation experiential. It is theoretical. It's very real. It has an impact on how we are. It has an impact if we are alert, if we are awake. And the spiritual life is about being awake, being alert, being able to perceive is an opportunity to transcend ourselves in love for others each moment. But it isn't easy. It isn't easy, particularly if we're in a rush. It's very hard to be aware if you're in a rush.
You know, I learned that the hard way.
And made on you, get resentful, and turn into anxiety. The anxiety, frustration, an explosion, isn't it? And I think most of the violence in the world is related to impatience and getting resentful and then losing control. This contemplation that informs us going out to others, sustains us when we meet a homeless person or persons, a homeless family, or when we meet people who are shut-ins and can't get out, or people who have a terminal illness and are incapacitated, or in our volunteer work, to be present and listening to others, no matter who it is. It sustains us. Capacity. This awareness is what in the East they call realization. And realization isn't primarily intellectual. It's the actual grasping in the situation of what. It's discerning it. It's sensitivity. Sensitivity is a vast awareness. It is the highest form. That sensitivity. Thomas can do that too. Any one of us can do that just by capacity for openness and alertness. We've seen in pure contemplation itself is vertical. It's an intense sensitivity to the divine, which develops along in the contemplative process. As it develops, it's a gift from God. God is the Spirit. Indeed, the Spirit is wrought that capacity in us, is giving us that capacity quite organically in our very nature. Indeed, Thomas Aquinas says, grace builds upon nature. The grace of God, which is a communication of the very life of the divine, takes into account our nature and communicates capacities of our nature. That's why books can help, but really there's a God knows it for each one of us, because we can only pray as we can, not as we can't, and that's those capacities that the divine works on us. That's the to have a healthy relationship with God, because there's a lot of I mean, I can do it. Those basic needs that haven't been met in that person, or the woundedness and brokenness of abuse or neglect, those wounds have to be through therapy and through prayer and through a supportive family or circle of friends. So grace is upon nature. And there is that intense journey, greater intimacy, greater and greater love of God. And there's the whole mystery of the cosmos. Of the cosmos. But then there is that the world into our relationships, our family, into our circle of friends, and to all the so that we can um, even to have a vision of the one that we can believe. Sure. No, is where in the end. And John Cross says, beautiful. Not in a selfish. We have to the unlovable. We can see as the unlovable, but society and for a contemplative in the world, that seemingly difficult, it becomes as easy as surrender. You have to surrender to being inconvenient in your gift of yourself is that other main to teaching. To this high school. I was looking for a teacher. School on the way. Stopped me. I was homeless. I was white. Chicago, most of the homeless are African American, and our system, and was in a again to get to school, and I wasn't as a wow. And he said something to me. Stop and talk to him, and I think he. And something very strange happened. I said something. Hurry to get to school, and I heard a funny, like, ping sound. A ping sound. And then I had a realization, that this test was like a ping sound. That was the wrong answer. That was an amazing experience. But each God is speaking to us. Or a cat, or feet on the knees. into now that you and then the third degree of contemplation is when you but when you God is giving himself to thing. Homeless person on the street. Or God forbid. Those Jehovah's Witnesses. In your joy, in your inspiration. And your dream. Your joys. To you. It's all there for us. There was you haven't seen it, you must see it. This wealth totally free. And the realities of life. takes them all over the world. I don't know what his name was. Are